March 2024, Worcester. A mother runs towards screams, her daughters, only to be stabbed in the heart by the man who once called her Mum. Damian Homer, once a care worker and DJ, now a murderer, sentenced to life. How does a man with a suspended sentence for domestic violence end up with blood on his hands again? This wasn't a tragic accident, nor an impulsive act. It was a storm, long brewing, fueled by addiction, denial, and years of unacknowledged rage. In custody, Homer wrote, "Alcohol possessed me, yet, when he stabbed Wendy Francis, he was not unconscious, he was determined." Inside, UK Evil on Stage, entertainers who went from stage to prison. Welcome to UK Real Crime, where England's calmest streets carry the echoes of horror, and behind the spotlight, some of Britain's performers hide far darker roles. Today, we peel back the curtains on entertainers who traded fame for felony. We uncover how the same faces once celebrated on stage became infamous behind bars. What you're about to hear may haunt your sense of safety and leave you questioning who truly deserves your trust. First offender, Damian Homer, 51 years old. Worcester, England, March 2nd, 2024. A quiet cul-de-sac became the scene of a double stabbing that left one woman dead and another clinging to life. What began as a domestic argument escalated into one of the most violent domestic incidents to reach Worcester Crown Court in years. Damian Homer, now 51 years old, was a man of many hats, former lorry driver, dairy manager, DJ, and care worker. He shared a home with his partner, 38-year-old Stacey Hill. Behind closed doors, their relationship had long been troubled. In June 2020, Homer had received a suspended sentence for a previous assault on Stacey, but on this March night, his violence escalated beyond repair. According to court testimony, the evening began with a drunken argument between Homer and Hill. Homer consumed 8 cans of cider and part of a bottle of wine. Hill, frightened by his growing rage, alerted her mother, 61-year-old Wendy Francis. She entered the home with a key, only to find her daughter screaming in the kitchen. Witnesses say she shouted, "Get off my daughter," and pushed Homer back. What followed was described as possessed. Homer grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Francis twice in the chest. As she collapsed, Stacey threw herself on top of her mother to protect her from further blows, taking the next stab wounds herself. Francis went into cardiac arrest and died at 9:18 p.m. Stacey suffered injuries to her hands, thigh, chest, and abdomen. She spent 10 days in hospital, including 3 in intensive care. Emergency responders found both women with clear defensive wounds, indicating they had desperately fought for their lives. When questioned, Homer initially claimed self-defense, but in custody, he wrote to Stacey, "Alcohol possessed me." He later admitted drinking over 100 units per week, a pattern beginning after job loss and back injury in 1998. The investigation moved quickly. Forensic evidence, witness statements, and Homer's own letter sealed the case. On November 7th, 2024, he appeared before Worcester Crown Court and pleaded guilty to the murder of Wendy Francis and the attempted murder of Stacey Hill. Judge Rupert Mayo called it a selfish and cruel attack and imposed a life sentence with a minimum term of 20 years. In court, Wendy Francis was remembered as one in a million with a heart of gold. Her family said she had embraced Homer with love and loyalty, making his betrayal unbearable. Stacey Hill, who survived, was praised by detectives as incredibly brave, her statement critical in securing Homer's conviction. Crimes like this rarely come without warning. The signs were there: a history of abuse, a suspended sentence, a growing addiction. The lesson is clear: prior violence cannot be ignored. Alcohol doesn't excuse brutality, and no one is safe when warning signs are dismissed. Some say evil has a face. In this case, it looked like a man who once claimed to care. But what happens when the entertainer isn't behind a closed door, but behind the wheel, with a child beside him and cocaine in his bloodstream? Second offender, Paul Des Ballard, 39 years old. Essex, England, February 20th, 2020. 2 deaths in a matter of seconds. One at a bus stop, another inside a car. The driver was not a stranger to the British public. He was a familiar face from children's television. But by the end of 2021, Paul Des Ballard, once beloved by young audiences, would become a convicted killer and sex offender, serving a 19-year prison sentence. Ballard, born on the 9th of March, 1982, was 39 years old when he was convicted. Known to millions for co-presenting the Disney Club and Dig It, his fall from grace was swift and brutal. Behind the scenes, Ballard was battling addiction, suffering from seizures, and hiding a dangerous sense of impunity. Court documents revealed a string of past seizures, including one where he woke up in a pool of blood, none of which he reported to authorities. Despite this, and after taking what prosecutors called a significant amount of cocaine, he got behind the wheel. At approximately 5:30 p.m. on that February evening, Ballard, with his 12-year-old son in the passenger seat, was driving a Volkswagen Golf through Squirrels Heath Road, Romford. He suffered another seizure, accelerated to over 100 miles per hour in a 30 zone, and caused an 8-car pileup. Eileen Haskell, aged 64, was killed when her car was struck from behind. Richard Trezise, aged 48, a local schoolteacher waiting at a bus stop, was also fatally hit. The judge later called it entirely fortuitous that more people weren't killed. But this was only the first tragedy. On the 19th of September 2020, just 7 months later, Ballard attacked a woman in a hotel room in Hatfield Heath. At 5 in the morning, he attempted to rape her, told her, "Your life is ending, you're dying tonight," and physically assaulted her. The woman escaped and alerted hotel staff. Ballard denied everything, claiming it was consensual. A jury disagreed. At Chelmsford Crown Court, he was convicted of rape, attempted rape, assault, threats to kill, and criminal damage. At sentencing, Ballard stood silent, no emotion, no apology. From the dock, he listened as the family of Eileen Haskell said, "You have ripped my life apart." Sharon Trezise, widow of Richard, added, "Losing him the way I did is something I will never recover from." The court confiscated over £500,000 in profits from Ballard's illegal business schemes, citing his pattern of dishonesty. Ballard's story is not simply about fame turned toxic, it's about risk denied, addiction ignored, and a life built on appearance rather than responsibility. Addiction does not excuse recklessness, seizures demand transparency, and silence in court does not equal remorse. In the end, 2 lives were ended, and a third forever scarred, all because one man, once trusted by millions, refused to acknowledge the danger he had become. Violence on the road, violence in a hotel room, 2 deaths, 1 rape, and 1 broken legacy. But the stage is far from empty. Another trusted presenter steps into the light, holding a weapon of his own. Third offender, Ashley Blake, 40 years old. Birmingham, England, January the 25th, 2009. What looked like a lively 18th birthday party at a bar owned by a familiar television face quickly turned into a scene of chaos and violence, altering lives and careers in a single moment of panic. Ashley Blake, 40 years old at the time, was once the trusted face of regional BBC programmes in the Midlands. He had grown up in Lozells, Birmingham, in a single-parent household, and had worked his way up from jobs, including lorry driver and flight attendant, to presenting on Midlands Today and Inside Out. On that late January night at his bar, the Place 2B in Sutton Coldfield, a fight broke out. A customer threw a punch, another youth fell unconscious, and Blake, witnessing the turmoil, ran behind the bar, grabbed a 3-foot patio umbrella pole, raised it high, and struck 17-year-old Greg Jones in the face. Jones, who had tried to act as a peacemaker, suffered a permanent scar. Blake then discarded the pole into a neighboring garden center in an effort to hide his actions and later denied having the weapon when police interviewed him. When confronted with CCTV footage, the jury concluded he had deliberately armed himself and lied repeatedly. The investigation revealed a troubling history. Blake had a string of convictions for theft, handling stolen goods, and driving while disqualified. In court, he listed the situation as one where he overreacted to a violent situation that was not his making, but the judge, Peter Carr, dismissed that defense and described the case as a serious episode of public violence requiring an immediate custodial sentence. On September 2, 2009, at Birmingham Crown Court, Blake was convicted of unlawful wounding and intending to pervert the course of justice. He was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. The appeal that November was rejected, and he was released 9 months into the sentence under a home curfew system. Outside the court doors, Greg Jones's father, Stephen Jones, said simply, "I'm just pleased Ashley Blake got what he deserves. My son is walking around with a scar for the rest of his life." The BBC swiftly dismissed Blake and re-examined its recruitment and conduct policies. Media commentary spoke of how one trusted broadcaster had thrown his career away in a moment of panic. International observers pointed to this case as an example of how public figures can exploit position and privilege yet face swift consequences when violence enters the scene. This story is not just about a former presenter turned prisoner, it is a stark reminder that fame does not shield you from responsibility. The sad truth is, one moment of panic, one choice to pick up a weapon, one attempt to hide the truth can bring everything crashing down. Let this be a warning that authority grants no immunity. Moments of crisis demand self-restraint, and dishonesty after wrongdoing stands as aggravating, not excusing, conduct. Violence may start in seconds, but consequences can last a lifetime, and trust, once broken, is rarely rebuilt. One moment of panic, one blow to the face, and a career shatters. But what if the violence isn't physical at all, but digital, obsessive, and relentless? Fourth offender, Alex Belfield, 42 years old. Nottingham, England, September 16, 2022. The courtroom fell silent as a former BBC radio presenter, once known for light-hearted banter and mid-morning charm, was sentenced to more than 5 years in prison. What unfolded over the next hour was not just a sentencing. It was the public unmasking of a man who had spent nearly a decade tormenting former colleagues, journalists, and strangers through a calculated campaign of online harassment. Alex Belfield, 45 years old at the time of his sentencing, had built his second act as a YouTube provocateur after falling out with the BBC. From his Nottingham home studio, he launched the Voice of Reason channel, accumulating hundreds of thousands of subscribers. But behind the microphone, Belfield was fueling what the judge called a relentless, vicious campaign of abuse, all under the guise of free speech. The court heard that his campaign began as early as 2011, with veiled threats aimed at BBC presenter Liz Green, including a reference suggesting she be sent to Auschwitz. The attacks expanded in April 2020, when Belfield turned his focus toward broadcaster Jeremy Vine, theatre blogger Philip Dehaney, videographer Ben Hewis, and radio presenter Bernie Keith. Vine testified that he received between 5,000 and 10,000 hostile tweets from Belfield's followers, describing it as swimming in sewage. He added, "This was absolutely Olympic-level stalking." Prosecutors laid out how Belfield had weaponized the internet, targeting victims with emails, videos, and social media posts designed to humiliate and intimidate. The judge called it a personal campaign of revenge, driven by grudges over perceived slights and professional rejection. Although Belfield denied wrongdoing and branded himself a political prisoner, the jury found him guilty on 4 counts of stalking, 2 of which involved serious alarm or distress. On the day of sentencing at Nottingham Crown Court, Belfield stood expressionless, dressed in a black suit. The judge imposed a sentence of 5 years and 26 weeks, noting that Belfield had shown no remorse. The impact on the victims was lasting. Liz Green spoke of suicidal thoughts and long-term medication. Philip Dehaney described fearing he would never work in media again, and Jeremy Vine now kept a photograph of Belfield near his door in case something worse happens. The case sparked institutional responses. The BBC issued an unreserved apology to targeted staff and implemented new policies on digital safety. Nottinghamshire Police Detective Janet Percival, also targeted in videos, said she was not frightened but called for cyberstalking laws to go further. Belfield was later ordered to pay substantial libel damages to both Vine and Percival and remains under strict license conditions. Sometimes harm does not come with bruises, it comes with followers, clickbait, and relentless noise. When technology becomes a weapon, silence is not neutrality, it is permission. A voice once welcomed into homes became a weapon turned inward. But stalking isn't the only quiet crime. Some betrayals start at the kitchen table, with the ones who raised us. Fifth offender, Hayley Matthews, 44 years old. Edinburgh, Scotland, June 12, 2024. The calm corridors of a TV studio turned into the backdrop of a betrayal that shocked a city. A trusted on-air personality was unveiled, not for a story she reported, but for one she committed. Hayley Matthews, 44 years old when she pleaded guilty, had built her reputation as a former presenter for STV2 and a columnist with the Edinburgh Evening News. On the surface, her career appeared stable and respectable. Behind closed doors, however, she was living a double life. Between September 2019 and November 2022, she withdrew approximately £120,000 from her mother's accounts. Her mother, Janice Matthews, was living with dementia and died in 2021. Matthews had obtained power of attorney in November 2019, then began making lavish purchases, luxury handbags, high-end shoes, designer goods. She told her father in a text she wasn't in a very good place while handling the money, yet the court found a trail of ATM withdrawals totaling £38,000 and PayPal transactions between £42,000 and £46,000. Her sister uncovered the fraud after being told the estate was worth only £36,000. At the sentencing hearing, Sheriff Alison Sterling described Matthews' actions as a series of calculated decisions that demonstrated she clearly understood right and wrong. Investigators found no single moment of madness, rather, a sustained exploitation of a vulnerable mother for personal gain. Matthews listened passively in the dock, shoulders slumped as the consequences unfurled. The initial custodial sentence of 2 years and 3 months was imposed because the offense was judged so serious that community disposal would be inappropriate. But in November 2024, her conviction was quashed on appeal, and she was instead sentenced to an 18-month community payback and supervision order, a 10-month curfew, and ordered to pay £6,300 in compensation. The case stirred unease among broadcasters and regulatory bodies alike. Colleagues remembered Matthews as friendly and composed, yet many admitted they never suspected she would exploit her role so completely. Media commentators remarked that the prosecution sent a clear message to those in positions of trust. The public does not watch only cameras. Cameras may turn on you. Internationally, elder abuse organizations cited the case in discussions about power of attorney reform and financial protection for vulnerable adults. This story is a study in hidden wounds, the facade of success, the quiet slide into excess, the betrayal of family, and a once trusted public figure rendered accountable. When someone wields influence and access, trust becomes a weapon, and for the victims, there is no rewind. Sixth offender, Constance Briscoe, 56 years old. London, England, May 1, 2014. The courtroom, hushed as one of Britain's most respected legal figures, stood before the Central Criminal Court, charged with betraying the very justice she once upheld. At 56 years old, Constance Briscoe had built her career as a barrister and part-time judge, one of the first black female recorders in England and Wales, the author of best-selling memoirs and a media presence. That image shattered when she was found guilty of 3 counts of perverting the course of justice, illegal acts committed while investigating the scandal involving former cabinet minister Chris Huhne and economist Vicky Pryce. Her fall was more than legal, it was psychological. At the heart of her case lay a joint desire to ensure the downfall of Chris Huhne, the court heard, a motive rooted not in justice but in personal resentment. In 2 separate witness statements, Briscoe denied contacts she had had with the media, altered critical documents, provided a forged copy to a handwriting expert, all of it meticulously planned. She lied, she manipulated, and as the judge said, as a recorder she should have understood the importance of preserving public trust. It began in the background of the 2003 point-swapping scandal. As Huhne and Pryce faced investigation, Briscoe helped Pryce leak details to journalists. When police probed, she claimed innocence, but forensic analysis exposed edits to statements that inserted an additional I to alter meaning. The court was told she weaponized trust. When she entered the dock, a hush fell, her black robes exchanged for prison, issue blue, the gavel sounded, 16 months custody. A figure of authority reduced to inmate. Reaction was swift. The legal community watched closely, as one of their own was stripped of her title. Chris Huhne called her a compulsive and self-publicizing fantasist, while his ex-wife Vicky Pryce said the conviction proved that no one is above the law. International legal watchdogs cited the case as a warning for professional misconduct worldwide. When a senior legal figure crosses the line, she drags a system down with her. In court, the judge highlighted the enduring damage. The offenses had almost detrimental impact on the convictions of 2 other people. It forced a reckoning in legal ethics and judicial appointments across the UK. No banner headlines, no street protests, but in legal newsletters and ethics boards, the ripple was real. Bar associations reviewed training for senior judges. Reporters reminded readers that the cloak of prestige offers no immunity. Her psychology emerged in bits, memoirs that claimed childhood abuse, the fame, the ambition. Many asked, did Briscoe feel entitled by success, immune to prosecution? Did a need for vengeance blur her moral compass? These questions rarely get answers. What we know is this: she sat at the top of the legal hierarchy and chose betrayal. In the end, the courtroom image is stark. A former judge, disbarred, stripped of legacy, released later in the year, but marked for life. This is a high-profile legal scandal turned viral criminal story, with courtroom drama, betrayal, and a distinguished career in ruins. Choices matter. Integrity cannot be borrowed from prestige. If you sit in a position of power, every decision carries test tube weight, not just for you, but for public trust. From the bench to the dock, the collapse was swift. But not all deceivers crave revenge. Some simply crave luxury and know how to game the system for years. Seventh offender, Anne Salter, 47 years old. Shepperton, Surrey, January 15, 2015. A face once familiar on British television stood before the court, the glare of cameras replaced by the cold light of accountability. Anne Salter, then 49 years old, had enjoyed a career broadcasting for BBC Radio 4, BBC Radio 5 Live, Channel 5, and Sky Sports, but behind her polished public persona lay a decade-long scheme, known only to a handful. Salter claimed she was unable to work because of depression, and from 2005 she collected various benefits, including over £30,000 in housing benefit, more than £28,000 in income support, and more than £7,000 in council tax benefit. Meanwhile, she posted an online showreel advertising herself as an experienced and glamorous presenter. Investigators discovered she had falsely claimed in her benefit forms that she could not work, even as she freelanced on television and radio. Over the period, she defrauded the public purse to the sum of £65,478.95. The turning point came when the Department for Work and Pensions spotted her uploaded CV, matched it to bank records, and linked it to a pattern of pre-planning stretching nearly a decade. In the dock at Guildford Crown Court, Salter sat stoically, her professional sheen gone, as the judge described her repeated dishonesty as a betrayal of public trust. She admitted guilt and was sentenced to a 12-month custodial term, suspended for 18 months, ordered to repay the full amount and complete 200 hours of unpaid work. Community reaction was immediate and sharp. Taxpayers' groups demanded tougher action, with one spokesperson noting that some shamelessly abuse our welfare system, diverting funds from the people who most need it. Broadcast colleagues in the industry quietly reassessed their own practices, while the DWP cited the case as a template of the risks inherent in benefit systems. International observers flagged the case in discussions of welfare integrity and the accountability of public figures. At the sentencing hearing, Salter's defense counsel described her as a vulnerable person suffering depression, yet the judge concluded that her role as a former presenter gave her greater awareness of public expectation. He emphasized that the fraud had been deliberate and sustained, saying the length and sophistication of the offending demonstrated more than momentary lapse. The broader social media echo was muted, no flash protests or viral outrage, yet industry commentaries noted the story had become a quietly viral cautionary tale about reputation, privilege, and misuse of trust. The psychology of the perpetrator emerged in fragments: a glamorous career, a carefully managed public image, a decade of hidden claims. No single act of violence, but a slow-burn betrayal. Salter's claim of vulnerability contrasted with evidence of freelancing during the fraud period, hinting at cognitive dissonance. The presenter who broadcast confidence while private forms declared incapacity, her decision to adopt the cloak of illness rather than transparency, underscores a rich vein of human complexity, ambition, denial, duplicity. When real-time footage is uploaded, when influencers live with filters, and when careers hinge on image, the line between public figure and private fraud can shrink deceptively. In this case, the baritone voice on air concealed a 10-year fraud beneath calm professionalism. Respect is not automatic, trust is not transferable, and when the system that helps the vulnerable is exploited, the ripple goes far beyond the claimant and the checkbook. A voice on air, a fraud in silence, benefit by benefit, lie by lie. But what happens when the spotlight falls on someone who sang about empowerment but stamped down with steel-toed rage? Final offender, Coelle Holly Beaupierre, 33 years old. London, England, December 3, 2019. A former grime star stood in the dock at Croydon Crown Court, the bright lights of her music career extinguished by the echoes of violence. Coelle Holly Beaupierre, known on stage as Lady Fury, was 33 years old when she was sentenced for 2 assaults on her then-partner, and the story unraveled far beyond the headlines. Beaupierre had built a profile as a youth worker, presenter, and performer, credited with associations with artists Wiley and Skepta, and featured by the BBC on International Women's Day. On the night of February the 19th, 2019, she launched a sustained and brutal assault on her partner at their home in Mitcham, southwest London, leaving the woman covered in bruises, savaged by kicks and stamped by mighty footprints. The victim, battered and bloody, escaped only by jumping from a second-floor window, then ran to a nearby pub where the landlord phoned the police. During the subsequent trial, the assault in February 1st, 2016, when Beaupierre kicked her partner in the face and caused a broken nose requiring surgery, was brought to light as part of the same campaign of violence. Investigators noted that Beaupierre has shown no remorse for her actions, and a jury found her guilty of 2 counts of assault, occasioning actual bodily harm, rejecting her account. In court, she sat in prison regulation garb, once a vibrant force on stage, now rendered an offender under criminal justice scrutiny. The prosecution described her conduct as deliberate and repeated, stating she acted out of panic and possessiveness, accusing her partner of infidelity while armed with a pole and rage. The judge handed down a sentence of 20 months imprisonment, citing the victim being forced to go to trial and relive the ordeals as an aggravating factor. Beaupierre showed no visible reaction as the sentence was announced, her public persona replaced by the label "convicted domestic abuser" in news headlines and trending video. Community reaction was immediate. Music circles expressed shock, youth organizations she had worked with issued statements distancing themselves, and victim support charities cited the case as a stark reminder of how influencers can perpetrate intimate violence behind closed doors. International media covering the case noted the irony: an individual once celebrated for empowerment instead became symbolic of abuse. Women's rights organizations referenced the case in discussions about domestic violence by female perpetrators, an often overlooked dimension. Now, viewers must respect 3 urgent warnings. First, charisma and public acclaim don't protect victims. Abusers can hide behind fame. Second, emotional control and jealousy can escalate into a pattern of violence. Seek help early. Third, digital records and witnesses matter. Evidence mounts, even when assaults happen indoors. These lessons transition smoothly into the conclusion of a story that may appear finished but echoes beyond. Power and performance do not exempt one from accountability. When the lights fade and the stage is empty, the truth remains. Violence often starts with denial, then builds into a pattern. For anyone with a public face, the guardrails must be higher. Each face, once familiar. Each voice, once trusted. But behind the charm, the gloss, the spotlight, a very different truth. And sometimes, it takes a courtroom, not a stage, to reveal what they really are. When the applause fades, some masks don't come off, they crack. From TV presenters with twisted secrets to performers who turn their fame into a smokescreen for violence, the stories you've just heard prove that evil can wear a smile and walk the red carpet. But these are only a handful of the chilling tales hiding behind Britain's bright lights. What other public figures are hiding darkness behind the curtain? Who else has fooled the nation while breaking the law behind closed doors? Hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss an episode of UK Real Crime, where we expose the crimes that slip past the spotlight. And tell us, what story should we uncover next? Drop your ideas in the comments below, because in this country, the truth is never far, and we're not done digging.